He had built an empire where fear ruled every room, until the day one woman refused to bow her head. Before anyone ever whispered that Malcolm King had fallen in love, there was only one undeniable truth about him. People obeyed. Without questions. Without hesitation. Without looking him in the eyes. The King estate stood on the edge of Lake Michigan like a fortress carved from black stone and silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the gray Chicago sky. Italian marble stretched beneath crystal chandeliers that had witnessed billion-dollar negotiations, blood-soaked betrayals, and decisions that reshaped entire criminal empires. Every object inside the mansion spoke the language of wealth, but the silence carried something far more expensive. Power. Every employee understood the rules before stepping through the front gate. Never speak unless spoken to. Never interfere. Never question Mr. King. The rules had kept hundreds of employees alive and employed for years. None of them imagined those rules would be challenged by the newest housemaid. Ava Brooks arrived just after sunrise carrying a single worn suitcase and a determination that had survived far greater storms than expensive men in tailored suits. At 27, she had worked hospitals, restaurants, hotels, and nursing homes. Hard work never frightened her. Cruelty did. She greeted every member of the household staff with the same warm smile, memorized names instead of titles, and quietly began polishing furniture that cost more than the apartment she had recently been forced to leave behind. Sophia Bennett, the estate manager, watched her carefully. "You'll do well here," she said, keeping her voice low. "Just remember one thing." Ava looked up. "When Mr. King comes home, don't look at him." Ava blinked. "Why?" "Because everyone who works here already knows better." Sophia offered no further explanation. She didn't need to. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the mansion transformed. Security radios crackled. Luxury SUVs rolled through the iron gates. Bodyguards appeared as if summoned by invisible strings. Housekeepers lowered their heads. Chefs stopped talking. Gardeners stepped away. From the driveway, the mansion itself seemed to hold its breath. Malcolm King had returned. He stepped from the vehicle dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that fit him like armor. Tall, broad-shouldered, composed, he moved with the calm confidence of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to command absolute obedience. His dark skin caught the fading sunlight, while the intricate tattoo disappearing beneath his collar hinted at a life written long before luxury found him. He acknowledged no one. He never had. People simply moved out of his path. One guard opened the front doors. Another collected confidential folders. Inside, the household formed an almost invisible corridor of lowered eyes. Everyone. Except one person. Ava stood beside a service cart holding fresh flowers for the grand staircase. She didn't glare. She didn't challenge him. She simply looked at him the way one human being naturally looks at another. For the first time that day, Malcolm slowed his steps. His eyes met hers. The hallway seemed to shrink. Sophia's heart nearly stopped. Every employee knew what usually followed a breach of protocol. Dismissal if you were lucky. Something much worse if you weren't. Malcolm's voice finally broke the silence. "You're new." "Yes, sir." "You weren't told the rules." "I was." "And yet you ignored one." Ava answered without trembling. "I don't believe respect begins by pretending someone doesn't exist." Silence crashed through the mansion. One of the guards subtly shifted his weight toward her. Sophia closed her eyes for a brief second. Everyone expected Malcolm's expression to harden. Instead, he simply studied her. Not her uniform. Not her appearance. Her eyes. There was no arrogance inside them. Only calm conviction. Before Malcolm could respond, a frightened kitchen assistant rushed into the hallway carrying a silver serving tray. His hands shook violently. One careless step sent crystal glasses crashing across the marble floor. The sharp explosion echoed through the entrance hall. The young employee froze, his face draining of color. I'm sorry, sir. No one moved. No one breathed. The boy knew the stories. Everyone did. Malcolm took one slow step toward him. The employee instinctively lowered himself, almost kneeling to gather the shattered glass with bare hands. Then Ava spoke. No. The single word echoed louder than the breaking crystal. Every head turned. She walked forward before anyone could stop her and gently placed a hand on the trembling employee's shoulder. Don't pick up broken glass with your hands. Sophia whispered desperately. Ava? But she continued anyway. She looked directly at Malcolm King. Then, with a voice steady enough to silence an empire, she said, Fear doesn't prevent mistakes, Mr. King. It only makes people too afraid to fix them. For the first time in years, no one inside the King estate was looking at the Mafia boss. They were all looking at the woman who had dared to defy him. The silence lingered long after Ava Brooks finished speaking. Not because her words had been loud, but because no one inside Malcolm King's mansion could remember the last time anyone had dared to contradict him. A crystal shard slid across the polished marble floor before finally coming to rest. No one bent to pick it up. Every pair of eyes shifted between Malcolm and the young kitchen assistant, who still knelt frozen in place, his trembling hands inches away from the broken glass. For several endless seconds, Malcolm said nothing. His dark eyes remained fixed on Ava. Most people mistook silence for mercy. Those who truly knew Malcolm King understood it was far more dangerous. Silence meant calculation. Silence meant every possibility was being weighed. Every weakness examined. Every consequence measured. Sophia Bennett could almost hear her own heartbeat. She had served 3 generations of powerful men. She had seen executives fired with a glance. Enemies disappear after a single sentence. Entire alliances collapse because Malcolm King simply walked away from a meeting. Yet the expression on his face now was unfamiliar. Not anger. Curiosity. You've worked here less than a day, Malcolm finally said, his voice calm enough to unsettle everyone even more. Yes, sir. And you've already decided how I should run my house. Ava lowered her eyes briefly, not in submission, but in thought. Then she answered. No, sir. She met his gaze again. I only believe people do their best work when they aren't terrified of failing. The words landed softly. Their impact was anything but. One of Malcolm's senior bodyguards instinctively shifted closer, waiting for the order everyone assumed would come. It never did. Instead, Malcolm looked toward the frightened young employee. What's your name? Ethan, sir. How long have you worked here? 3 months. And why were you reaching for broken glass with your bare hands? Ethan swallowed. Because I thought I'd be fired if I didn't clean it immediately. Another silence. This one heavier than the last. Malcolm's gaze drifted toward Sophia. Who taught him that? Sophia hesitated. No one, sir. He learned it himself. Malcolm looked back at Ethan. No. His voice remained level. He learned it by watching. The sentence echoed through the grand entrance like quiet thunder. Without another word, Malcolm turned toward Ava. You stopped him? Yes. You barely know him. No. Then why? Ava glanced at Ethan before answering. My father worked construction. Her voice softened. He always said broken glass can be replaced. She paused. Hands cannot. Something shifted inside Malcolm. Almost imperceptibly. He remembered another voice. His grandmother's. Years ago, before the expensive suits. Before the empire. Before people feared saying no. She had once wrapped his scraped hands after he'd tried fixing a shattered kitchen window alone. Never let pride make you bleed for something that can be swept away. He hadn't thought about those words in nearly 25 years. Until now. You may leave, Malcolm said. No one moved. The staff exchanged uncertain glances. Leave? Who? Ethan. The young man stared in disbelief. Yes, sir. See the nurse. His eyes briefly settled on Ethan's trembling hands. And wear gloves next time. Yes, sir. Ethan practically stumbled away, unable to believe he still had a job. A quiet wave of relief spread through the household. People inhaled again. Conversations remained impossible. Everyone sensed something invisible had shifted. Not in the mansion. In Malcolm. As the employees slowly returned to work, Malcolm continued walking toward the grand staircase. Halfway up, he stopped. Without turning around, he spoke. Sophia. Yes, sir. The new maid. Sophia's stomach tightened. Yes, sir. Assign her to the West Wing. Sophia blinked. The West Wing? Only Malcolm's private quarters, library, and executive offices occupied that side of the estate. No new employee had ever been assigned there. It's a restricted area, sir. I know. He resumed climbing the stairs. She doesn't seem interested in following expectations. A faint pause. Let's see what she does when the expectations become greater. Upstairs, Malcolm entered his private office overlooking Lake Michigan. The city skyline shimmered beneath the fading sunset, but he barely noticed it. Instead, his thoughts returned to a pair of fearless brown eyes. There had been no rebellion in them. No ambition. No manipulation. Only honesty. He disliked honesty. Honest people were difficult to predict. They couldn't be bought as easily. They rarely feared wealth. And they almost never feared power. His phone vibrated. Vincent Cole, his chief of security. Sir. Speak. We finished the background investigation on Ava Brooks. Malcolm stared through the glass wall. What did you find? A brief silence answered him. Nothing unusual. No criminal record. No hidden debts. No political affiliations. Former nursing assistant. Multiple part-time jobs. Excellent references. Vincent hesitated. There's only one thing. What? Every former employer described her the same way. Malcolm waited. She refuses to look away when something is wrong. The office became perfectly still. Downstairs, Ava quietly arranged fresh white lilies in a crystal vase, unaware that somewhere above her, the most feared man in Chicago had just encountered something no rival family, no government investigation, and no assassin had ever managed to become. A question he could not answer. The following morning, the King estate woke before the sun. By 5:30, the kitchens buzzed with quiet precision. Fresh bread came out of stone ovens. Coffee filled the air with its rich aroma. Housekeepers moved silently through endless hallways lined with priceless paintings and polished walnut doors. Outside, gardeners trimmed perfectly sculpted hedges while armed security guards rotated shifts with military discipline. Everything inside Malcolm King's world operated with flawless order. Or at least, it always had. Ava Brooks was arranging fresh towels inside the West Wing when Sophia Bennett appeared at the doorway. You've been reassigned. Ava looked up. I heard. Sophia folded her arms. Do you know why? I imagine Mr. King enjoys keeping people uncomfortable. For the first time in years, Sophia almost smiled. You'll fit in better than I expected. She handed Ava a brass key. The library. Ava accepted it. What about it? You clean it. Sophia lowered her voice. Nobody touches anything on his desk. I understand. And if he's inside? I leave immediately. Sophia hesitated. That's what everyone else does. Ava noticed the choice of words. Everyone else? Sophia didn't answer. She simply walked away. The West Wing felt different from the rest of the mansion. Quieter. Less like a home. More like a command center disguised behind expensive architecture. Every room reflected Malcolm's personality. Perfect symmetry. Dark oak. Black marble. Books arranged with mathematical precision. No family photographs. No personal decorations. Nothing that suggested warmth. Only discipline. Ava entered the library carrying a basket of cleaning supplies. Sunlight poured through towering windows, painting long golden lines across thousands of leather-bound books. She moved carefully, dusting each shelf with practiced efficiency. Then she noticed something. A chessboard. Half finished. One side black. One side white. The pieces hadn't been touched in days. She stared for a moment before quietly smiling. So, she whispered to herself. You don't always finish what you start. You sound very confident. The deep voice came from behind her. Ava turned. Malcolm stood near the doorway, his suit jacket draped over one shoulder, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He hadn't made a sound. I didn't hear you. I know. He walked toward the chessboard. You play. My grandfather taught me. Malcolm looked down at the unfinished game. Then tell me. He gestured toward the board. Who wins? Ava studied the position. Only silence filled the room. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress him. She simply observed. Finally, she spoke. Neither. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Interesting answer. The Black King wins eventually. She pointed toward several pieces. But only because White became obsessed with attacking. Another pause. Sometimes surviving is smarter than conquering. Malcolm looked at the board again. That wasn't the answer he had expected. His advisors always admired aggression. His rivals respected force. This woman valued restraint. You think I play too aggressively? I don't know how you play. She met his eyes. I'm talking about chess. Something almost resembling amusement flickered across Malcolm's face. Almost. Before he could answer, shouting echoed from the hallway. A frightened voice. Please? I didn't mean to. Another voice answered. Cold. Angry. You've ruined it. Malcolm stepped outside. Ava followed. Near the entrance to the dining hall, a young housekeeper stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. A silver serving pitcher lay dented on the floor. Across from her stood Victor Hayes, Malcolm's operations manager. 50 years old. Expensive suit. Sharp smile. Cruel eyes. You incompetent girl. Victor grabbed the young woman's wrist hard enough to make her flinch. Do you know what this costs? I'm sorry. I'll replace it. With what? He laughed bitterly. Your salary for the next 10 years? The girl lowered her head. No, sir. Victor tightened his grip. You people only learn when it hurts. Ava's expression changed instantly. Not anger. Resolve. Let her go. Victor turned slowly. I'm sorry. You heard me. Ava took one calm step forward. She's already apologized. Victor stared at her as though she'd forgotten her place. You've been here 2 days. And? You think you can tell me how to discipline my staff? Ava looked at the frightened young woman before answering. No. I think no one deserves to be humiliated over an accident. Victor laughed. You must not understand how this house works. No. Her voice remained steady. I understand exactly how it should work. Every employee nearby stopped pretending to clean. Even the security guards watched carefully. No one interrupted. Victor looked toward Malcolm. Sir. He smiled confidently. I assume you'd like this handled. The hallway became completely still. Victor expected Malcolm to reinforce authority. The housekeepers expected Ava to lose her job. The young maid expected to be blamed. Instead, Malcolm asked only one question. Without taking his eyes off Ava. If you were in his position. He paused. What would you do differently? Ava answered without hesitation. I teach. She glanced at the dented picture. Not terrorize. The picture can be repaired. She looked at the frightened young woman whose wrist was already turning red. But if you convince someone they're worthless. Her voice softened. Sometimes they believe you forever. No one noticed Malcolm's hand slowly tightening behind his back. Because somewhere beneath years of violence, discipline, and absolute control, a memory he had buried long ago was beginning to wake up. Power rarely announced itself with shouting. Inside Malcolm King's empire, it spoke through silence. The conversation in the hallway ended without another word. Victor Hayes immediately released the young housekeeper's wrist, though the confidence that usually defined him had vanished. He forced a polite nod toward Malcolm before disappearing down the corridor, his polished shoes clicking against the marble with measured restraint. The frightened maid remained frozen. Ava walked over first. She gently picked up the dented silver pitcher, set it on a nearby table, and examined the girl's reddened wrist. Can you move your fingers? The young woman nodded weakly. I think so. Good. Ava smiled. Go get some ice before it swells. The girl hesitated. What if Mr. Hayes? He won't stop you. Her voice was calm. And if he does? She glanced briefly toward Malcolm. He'll have to explain why. The maid hurried away. One by one, the remaining staff quietly returned to their work, though whispers spread through the mansion faster than footsteps. No one could believe what they had witnessed. Not because Ava had spoken. She had done that before. But because Malcolm King had listened. Upstairs, Malcolm entered his private office without asking Ava another question. The heavy oak door closed behind him. Vincent Cole was already waiting. The head of security placed a folder on the desk. Your 3 o'clock meeting has been confirmed. Malcolm didn't answer. Instead, he stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The city stretched endlessly beneath gray clouds. Normally, this view centered him. Today, his thoughts remained downstairs. Victor. Vincent looked up. Yes, sir. How long has he supervised household operations? 8 years. Any complaints? Vincent paused. Officially? Yes. None. And unofficially? Another pause. There have been rumors. What kind? Staff turnover. Several employees resigned after working directly under him. Most never gave reasons. Malcolm slowly turned around. They were afraid. Vincent chose his words carefully. They respected authority. Malcolm's expression hardened. No. He walked toward his desk. They feared humiliation. The difference settled heavily between them. Vincent had worked beside Malcolm for almost 15 years. He recognized the look in his employer's eyes. Someone was being evaluated. Not Ava. Victor. Downstairs, Ava spent the afternoon organizing the West Wing Library. Thousands of books surrounded her, yet one shelf immediately caught her attention. Biographies. Military history. Leadership. Psychology. Not a single novel. She smiled to herself. So that's who you are. Her fingers paused on a thick volume whose spine had begun separating from years of use. Unlike the others, this book had been opened countless times. She carefully carried it to a side table. Without asking permission, she repaired the loose binding using archival tape stored with the estate's restoration supplies. When she finished, the damage had almost disappeared. You repaired it. A familiar voice interrupted the silence. Malcolm stood near the entrance once again. I did. You weren't instructed to. No. Then why? Ava closed the book gently. Because someone valued it enough to wear it out. She handed it back to him. It deserved better than falling apart. Malcolm accepted the book without speaking. His thumb brushed across the newly repaired spine. Nearly invisible. Meticulous. Patient. You've done this before. My mother repaired books at our neighborhood church. A small smile touched Ava's face. She said people reveal themselves by what they choose to fix. And what does this reveal? She looked around the endless library. You preserve knowledge. Her eyes met his. But you don't preserve people the same way. The words landed softly. Yet Malcolm felt them more deeply than any insult he'd received from rival bosses. Before either of them spoke again, the sound of laughter drifted in through the open doorway. Not joyful laughter. Mocking laughter. Ava stepped into the hallway. Near the servants' staircase, two junior employees stood whispering while an elderly janitor struggled to lift a heavy supply crate by himself. Neither offered to help. One simply laughed. He's too old for this place. He'll quit eventually. The older man kept trying despite his shaking hands. Without hesitation, Ava walked over. Mr. Harris. The elderly janitor looked up. Oh. Miss Brooks. Let's carry it together. You don't have to. I know. She smiled warmly. But I'd like to. Together they lifted the crate with slow, careful movements until it reached the storage room. The two younger workers watched awkwardly. Neither moved. Neither spoke. When Ava returned, she looked at them without anger. Next time. Her voice remained gentle. Try helping before laughing. The hallway grew quiet. No lecture. No humiliation. Only simple truth. Hidden behind the library doorway, Malcolm had witnessed every second. No audience. No reward. No opportunity for praise. She had helped because she believed someone should. Nothing more. As Ava disappeared down the corridor with her cleaning cart, Malcolm remained motionless. Vincent approached quietly from behind. You've been watching her a lot lately. Malcolm continued staring after. The woman who had somehow made the largest mansion in Chicago feel different. Not softer. Honest. Finally, he spoke. Most people become kind when someone important is watching. His eyes never left the empty hallway. She becomes kind when no one is. For the first time in many years, Malcolm King realized he wasn't studying a potential employee anymore. He was trying to understand a woman whose strength came from something no amount of money, violence, or power could ever buy. And that unsettled him far more than any enemy ever had. Not every betrayal arrives with a gun. Sometimes, it wears an expensive suit, carries a polished smile, and hides behind the illusion of loyalty. 3 days passed without another confrontation. The King estate returned to its familiar rhythm. Luxury vehicles arrived and departed. Executives came and went through Malcolm King's private conference room. Staff members performed their duties with quiet efficiency, though an invisible change had settled over the mansion. People no longer looked away when Ava entered a room. They smiled. Some even greeted her by name. It was a small change. But inside a house built on fear, even a smile felt revolutionary. Not everyone appreciated it. Victor Hayes noticed everything. He noticed the younger employees laughing during their lunch breaks again. He noticed the kitchen staff speaking with more confidence. Most of all, he noticed Malcolm asking questions instead of issuing commands whenever Ava happened to be nearby. To Victor, that was dangerous. Fear had always been the easiest form of control. Respect was much harder to manipulate. Late one afternoon, Malcolm left the estate for a meeting downtown, accompanied by Vincent and his security detail. The moment the gates closed behind the convoy, Victor gathered the household employees inside the service hall. His expression was pleasant. Too pleasant. "I have an announcement." Everyone stopped working. Victor folded his hands behind his back. This household has recently forgotten its standards. His eyes slowly settled on Ava. Professional boundaries are disappearing. No one spoke. "You were hired to clean." He took a deliberate step toward her. "Not to influence how this estate is managed." Ava calmly placed the linen she had been folding onto the table. "I've never tried to manage anything." "No?" Victor smiled thinly. "Then perhaps you've forgotten your conversations with Mr. King." "I haven't." "And yet you've challenged his decisions." "I answered questions he asked." The room became painfully quiet. Victor circled her slowly, like a prosecutor building his case. "Do you know why this house has survived for decades?" Ava waited. "Because everyone understands their place." He leaned closer. "You don't." Several employees lowered their heads. They knew what came next. Public humiliation. Victor reached into his jacket pocket and produced a sealed envelope. "Beginning tomorrow." He placed it on the table between them. "Your employment is terminated." Gasps spread through the room. Sophia Bennett stepped forward immediately. "Victor, you don't have the authority." "I do while Mr. King is absent." He smiled confidently. "I've already prepared the paperwork." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Every employee looked toward Ava. Some expected tears. Others expected anger. Instead, she simply picked up the envelope. She looked at it for several seconds. Then carefully placed it back on the table. "I understand." Victor almost looked disappointed. No argument. Ava smiled politely. "What would arguing accomplish?" "You don't think this is unfair?" She considered the question honestly. "I think fairness depends on whether we're trying to protect people." Her eyes met his. "Or protect our pride." Victor's smile disappeared. "You think you're better than me?" "No. I think leadership and intimidation are different things." He laughed sharply. "You still don't understand this world." "Maybe not." Her voice remained steady. "But I understand people." Before Victor could answer, a loud crash echoed through the hallway. One of the estate's elderly maintenance workers stumbled while carrying a heavy toolbox down the staircase. The metal case burst open. Tools scattered across the marble floor. The older man collapsed awkwardly against the banister, clutching his ankle in obvious pain. Without hesitation, Ava ran toward him. The others followed. Victor didn't move. The maintenance worker grimaced. "I'm all right." "No, you're not." Ava knelt beside him. "Don't try to stand." She carefully examined the swelling around his ankle. "We need ice." A young employee immediately hurried toward the kitchen. Another brought a chair. Within seconds, staff members who had once been too frightened to act were working together without waiting for permission. Victor watched the scene unfold with growing frustration. Nobody was looking at him anymore. Nobody was waiting for his orders. They were responding to compassion instead. At that exact moment, the sound of engines echoed outside. Black SUVs rolled through the front gates. Malcolm had returned nearly an hour earlier than expected. He entered through the main hall just as two employees helped the injured maintenance worker into a wheelchair. His eye scanned the room. The scattered tools. The concerned staff. Victor standing alone. Ava kneeling beside the injured man with one hand resting reassuringly on his shoulder. Malcolm looked at Vincent. "What happened?" Before Victor could answer, the elderly worker spoke first. "It wasn't anyone's fault, sir." His breathing remained uneven. "I lost my footing." Malcolm nodded once. Then his attention shifted to the unopened envelope still lying on the nearby table. He picked it up. "Read the first page." His expression revealed nothing. Very slowly, he looked at Victor. Then at Ava. Finally, he asked a single question that caused every heartbeat in the room to pause. "Who decided that she should leave my house?" The room fell into complete silence. And for the first time since Victor Hayes had begun working for Malcolm King 8 years earlier, he wasn't certain he knew the right answer. The strongest empires are not shaken by bullets. They are shaken by a single moment that forces a powerful man to question the person he has become. No one answered Malcolm King's question. Not immediately. The envelope remained in his hand. The injured maintenance worker was quietly wheeled toward the estate's medical room, while the remaining employees stood perfectly still, each aware that something far more significant than a termination letter was unfolding. Victor Hayes cleared his throat. "Sir, I believed Miss Brooks had overstepped her responsibilities." Malcolm's eyes never left the document. "You believed?" "Yes, sir." "And based on that belief?" Victor straightened his posture. "I acted in the estate's best interest." A long silence followed. Then Malcolm folded the termination letter in half. Once. Twice. Without changing his expression, he handed it back. "You acted without my authority." Victor's confidence faltered. "I thought, I know what you thought." Malcolm's voice remained calm. "That is precisely the problem." He turned toward Sophia. "This letter never existed." "Yes, sir." "Destroy it." Sophia accepted the envelope immediately. "Of course." No dramatic speech followed. No public humiliation. Malcolm simply walked away. Yet everyone in the room understood exactly what had happened. Victor had just been corrected. Not privately. Not behind closed doors. But in front of every employee he had spent years intimidating. For a man like Victor, the silence was punishment enough. That evening, rain began falling over Chicago. The estate disappeared behind sheets of silver water while thunder rolled across Lake Michigan. Most employees had already retired to their quarters. Only a few lights remained on inside the West Wing. Malcolm stood alone in his study, turning a crystal glass slowly in his hand. He hadn't poured a drink. He was thinking. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Vincent entered carrying a slim black folder. "You asked for everything we could find." Malcolm nodded. "Leave it." After Vincent disappeared, Malcolm opened the folder. The first pages contained nothing unusual. Employment history. Medical records. Tax filings. Volunteer work. Everything was ordinary. Perhaps too ordinary. Then he reached the final section. Personal history. His eyes slowed. 5 years earlier, Ava Brooks had been accepted into one of Chicago's most respected nursing programs. Outstanding evaluations. Excellent academic performance. Graduation only months away. Then she withdrew. No explanation. Malcolm frowned. He continued reading. Her mother had suffered a massive stroke during Ava's final semester. Insurance refused to cover long-term rehabilitation. Medical bills consumed everything the family owned. Ava left school. Worked 3 jobs. Cared for her mother every night. Never re-enrolled. There were handwritten notes attached from former employers. Always volunteers for difficult shifts. Never leaves until everyone else is safe. Often refuses overtime pay if another employee needs the hours. Another letter caught Malcolm's attention. It wasn't professional. It was personal. A short thank you card written by an elderly patient. The handwriting trembled with age. "Thank you for treating me like I still mattered." He stared at the sentence for a long time. Like I still mattered. The words refused to leave his mind. He remembered another face. His grandmother. The woman who had raised him after violence stole nearly everything from his childhood. She used to cook for neighbors who couldn't afford groceries. She used to say, the richest person in a room is the one who reminds forgotten people they still have worth. He had loved that woman more than anyone. Yet somewhere between building an empire and defending it, he had stopped living by her words. Downstairs, unaware that her past had just been uncovered, Ava quietly finished organizing supplies in the infirmary. The elderly maintenance worker smiled gratefully. You didn't have to stay. She adjusted the blanket over his legs. I know. You always say that. She laughed softly. Because it's true. You help people when no one's watching. She looked down for a moment. My mother taught me something. What was that? If kindness only appears when there's an audience. She gently placed a glass of water on the bedside table. Then it isn't kindness. Outside the partially open door, Malcolm had stopped on his way through the corridor. He hadn't intended to listen. Yet every word reached him. He watched as Ava wished the old man goodnight before quietly switching off the room's lights. She never noticed him standing there. She expected nothing. No praise. No promotion. No reward. Only the quiet satisfaction of knowing someone would sleep with a little less pain. As she disappeared into the dimly lit hallway, Malcolm remained motionless. For years, he had believed loyalty could be purchased. Respect could be demanded. Obedience could be enforced. But this woman, she inspired all three without asking for any of them. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Malcolm King found himself wondering whether the greatest weakness in his empire had never been his enemies. Perhaps it had always been the walls he had built around his own heart. Love does not begin the moment two people look into each other's eyes. Sometimes, it begins the moment one of them quietly decides to walk away. A week passed. The King estate felt different now. Not because its routines had changed. The marble floors still gleamed beneath the morning sun. Luxury cars continued to glide through the iron gates. Meetings filled Malcolm King's calendar from dawn until midnight. Armed guards still patrolled every hallway with disciplined precision. But something invisible had shifted. Employees laughed more often. The kitchen staff no longer whispered every conversation. Even the gardeners greeted one another without glancing over their shoulders first. The mansion was still ruled by Malcolm King. Yet fear no longer ruled every room. He noticed it. He noticed everything. One afternoon, Malcolm stood in his office overlooking the lake while Vincent reviewed the week's security reports. No incidents. No breaches. No financial irregularities. Malcolm nodded absent-mindedly. Vincent closed the folder. There's something else. What? Staff turnover. Malcolm finally looked up. What about it? For the first time in almost 2 years. Vincent allowed himself a faint smile. No one resigned this month. Silence settled between them. That number had once been routine. Employees came. Employees left. Malcolm had never questioned why. Now, he already knew. They're staying because they feel safe. Vincent studied him carefully. I believe they're staying because they feel seen. The sentence lingered long after Vincent left the room. Seen. Not controlled. Not managed. Seen. Downstairs, Ava folded freshly washed linens with the same quiet focus she brought to everything she did. Sophia approached carrying a small envelope. It arrived this morning. Ava wiped her hands before accepting it. The return address immediately caught her attention. Chicago Memorial College of Nursing. Her expression softened. Sophia noticed. Good news. Ava slowly opened the letter. Inside was an invitation. The nursing program had reopened deferred admissions for former students. Her academic credits were still valid. If she enrolled within 30 days, she could finally finish the degree she had abandoned 5 years earlier. For several moments, she simply stared at the page. The dream she had buried beneath responsibility suddenly stood before her once again. Sophia smiled. "You should go." Ava looked around the enormous mansion. "I've only just begun working here. And I gave my word." Sophia gently touched her shoulder. "Sometimes keeping a promise to yourself matters too." That evening, after finishing her duties, Ava sat alone in the estate's garden. The fountain murmured softly beneath the fading light while roses swayed gently in the summer breeze. She unfolded the letter again. A nurse. That had always been the dream. Not because of the title. Not because of the salary. Because caring for people had never felt like work. It had always felt like purpose. Footsteps approached along the stone pathway. Malcolm. He wasn't wearing a suit. Only a dark sweater with rolled sleeves, making him look less like the feared head of an empire and more like a man who hadn't truly rested in years. "You received good news." Ava looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" "I've learned to recognize the difference." "The difference?" "Between someone carrying hope." He glanced toward the letter in her hands. "And someone carrying disappointment." Ava smiled faintly. "I've been invited back to nursing school." Malcolm remained silent. "You sound happy." "I am." "But?" She lowered her eyes. "I can't do both." He already understood. "The estate." She nodded. "I accepted this job because I needed stability." "And now?" "And now I have to choose." The breeze carried another long silence between them. Finally, Ava folded the letter carefully and stood. "I've made my decision." Malcolm's chest tightened unexpectedly. "I'll submit my resignation tomorrow." The word struck with surprising force. He had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without emotion. He had survived betrayal, violence, and loss without hesitation. Yet hearing one housemaid calmly announce her departure left him unable to answer. Ava smiled politely. "You've treated me fairly." She extended her hand. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity." Malcolm looked at her outstretched hand. For several seconds, he couldn't move. If she left, the mansion would return to exactly what it had been before she arrived. Efficient, orderly, profitable, and unbearably empty. Only after she quietly walked back toward the house did Malcolm realize something that unsettled him more than any rival organization ever could. He wasn't afraid of losing an employee. He was afraid of losing the only person who had ever walked into his world and taught it how to breathe. The greatest declaration of love is rarely spoken. More often, it is revealed in the moment someone chooses another person's future over their own desires. The following morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight. Inside the King estate, nothing appeared unusual. Breakfast was served precisely at 7. Security teams rotated without interruption. Luxury sedans came and went through the front gates. Employees greeted one another with a confidence that had been unimaginable only weeks before. Only Malcolm King noticed the difference. He noticed that Ava no longer unpacked supplies for the following week. Her locker had been carefully organized. The books she occasionally borrowed from the library had already been returned. She was preparing to leave. Quietly. Without expecting anyone to stop her. From his office window, Malcolm watched her cross the courtyard carrying a basket of freshly folded linens toward the staff residence. For the first time in years, an important business meeting waited downstairs. For the first time in years. He ignored it. Instead, he picked up the phone. "Vincent." "Yes, sir." "Cancel my morning." There was a brief silence. "The investors are already here." "I know. They won't be pleased." Malcolm looked out toward the gardens where Ava was helping an elderly gardener trim damaged rose branches. "They can wait." An hour later, Ava entered the West Wing one final time. She intended to clean the library before submitting her resignation. The familiar scent of leather-bound books greeted her as sunlight filtered through the towering windows. Everything looked exactly as it had on her first day. Except one thing. The unfinished chessboard. Someone had completed the game. The Black King still stood. But instead of capturing the remaining White Queen, the winning move had never been played. Beside the board rested a folded piece of stationery. Ava opened it. Only one sentence had been written in Malcolm's unmistakably precise handwriting. Not every victory is worth taking. She stared at the message, uncertain what it meant. You noticed? His voice came from behind her. She turned slowly. Malcolm stood several steps away. No bodyguards. No advisors. Just the man. I did. You said something your first day. Ava waited. Sometimes surviving is smarter than conquering. He looked toward the chessboard. I've been thinking about that. A gentle silence settled between them. Finally, Malcolm spoke again. I reviewed your file. Ava's expression changed slightly. You shouldn't have. I know. But I did. He paused. You gave up nursing school for your mother. She lowered her eyes. I made the choice I believed was right. You never regretted it. Every day. She smiled sadly. And never once. The contradiction lingered in the air. Malcolm understood it immediately. Sacrifice always carried both pain and peace. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a cream-colored envelope. I contacted Chicago Memorial College. Ava looked at him, confused. What? They confirmed your place. She didn't move. They also confirmed your remaining tuition. Slowly, Malcolm extended the envelope toward her. It's been paid. The room became perfectly still. Ava didn't reach for it. I can't accept that. Why? Because I didn't earn it. His answer came quietly. Yes, you did. She shook her head. No. I work here. I receive a salary. I don't receive gifts. Malcolm's eyes remained steady. This isn't a gift. What is it? It's an investment. She frowned. In what? He looked directly at her. In the person who reminded everyone inside this house, including me, that dignity has greater value than fear. The words hung in the quiet library. Ava felt emotion rise unexpectedly inside her chest. I don't know what to say. You don't have to. She slowly pushed the envelope back toward him. I still can't accept it. Malcolm almost smiled. I thought you'd say that. He placed the envelope on the chessboard instead. Then consider it repayment. For what? For saving something I didn't realize I'd lost. Ava looked at him without speaking. My empire. He shook his head gently. No. My humanity. Neither of them noticed footsteps approaching outside the library. Sophia. Vincent. Several employees. Word had quietly spread that Malcolm had cancelled every meeting to speak privately with the housemaid. No one intended to eavesdrop. Yet no one walked away. Inside the room, Malcolm took one slow step closer. Not as a mafia boss. Not as the most feared man in Chicago. Simply as Malcolm. If you leave. He paused, choosing every word with unusual care. I won't stop you. Ava listened silently. I won't use money. I won't use loyalty. I won't use obligation. His voice softened. But if you ever return. He held her gaze with a vulnerability no one had ever witnessed. I hope it will be because you choose to walk beside me. Outside the door, no one spoke. The mansion had witnessed power. It had witnessed violence. It had witnessed wealth beyond imagination. but never before had it witnessed the most powerful man in the building lay down his authority. Before the quiet strength of a woman who had never once been afraid to stand when everyone else chose to kneel. The most powerful man in the room is not the one who commands obedience. It is the one who learns when to bow before the truth. The library remained silent long after Malcolm King finished speaking. Outside the doorway, no one dared to move. Sophia lowered her eyes. Vincent stood with his hands folded behind his back, staring quietly at the polished wooden floor. Even the security guard seemed to understand that they were witnessing something no amount of money could ever purchase. Transformation. Inside the room, Ava looked at the man standing before her. He no longer resembled the untouchable mafia boss she had met only weeks earlier. The arrogance was gone. The certainty that power solved everything had disappeared. For the first time, Malcolm King looked like a man asking for nothing except honesty. Ava drew a slow breath. "You've changed." Malcolm smiled faintly. "I've begun to." She stepped closer until only the chessboard separated them. "When I first came here." Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table. "Everyone feared disappointing you." Malcolm lowered his eyes. "I know. They weren't loyal. They were afraid." Another quiet silence settled between them. "I used to think fear protected what I'd built." His voice was almost reflective now. "I spent years believing that if people feared me enough, they would never betray me. And now?" He looked around the library. The repaired book. The unfinished chessboard. The sunlight spilling through the tall windows. "I finally understand something my grandmother tried to teach me." He smiled to himself. "You can force people to stay." He looked back at Ava. "But you can never force them to care." Those words carried no trace of the man who had once ruled every room through intimidation. Only humility. Ava's eyes softened. "That's why this house feels different." Before either of them could speak again, Sophia gently knocked on the open door. "Mr. King." He turned. "The staff." She hesitated. "They've gathered in the main hall." Malcolm frowned slightly. "Why?" "They wanted to say goodbye." Minutes later, the entire household stood together beneath the grand chandelier. Housekeepers. Chefs. Gardeners. Drivers. Security guards. Maintenance workers. Even Ethan, whose trembling hands had once reached for broken glass, now stood confidently near the front of the room. The elderly maintenance worker leaned comfortably on a cane instead of struggling alone. No one had been instructed to gather. They simply came. Because they wanted to. Ava looked around in surprise. "You didn't have to do this." Sophia smiled warmly. "We know." One after another, employees thanked her. For listening. For helping. For remembering their names. For treating every person inside the estate as though they mattered. Some laughed. Some quietly wiped away tears. Victor Hayes stood near the back of the room. His proud posture had vanished. After Malcolm's decision, he had submitted his resignation that very morning. Without anger. Without excuses. He walked toward Ava. "I owe you an apology." The room fell silent. "I confused respect with control." His voice carried genuine regret. "I spent years making people fear me." He lowered his head. "And somehow, you accomplished more in a few weeks simply by treating them with dignity." Ava accepted his apology with a gentle nod. "I hope you remember that people can change." Victor looked toward Malcolm. "I believe that now." As he quietly walked away, Malcolm stepped forward. There was no prepared speech. No dramatic announcement. Only truth. "When my parents died." His voice echoed softly through the hall. "My grandmother raised me." Very few people inside the mansion had ever heard Malcolm speak about his childhood. "She used to tell me." He smiled sadly. The day people obey you because they trust your heart instead of fearing your power is the day you become worthy of leading them. He looked around the room. I spent half my life forgetting those words. Then his eyes found Ava once more. And one extraordinary woman reminded me. He walked toward her until they stood face to face. I won't ask you to stay. You have a dream that existed long before I met you. His voice remained steady. You should become the nurse you were always meant to be. Ava felt tears gather despite herself. And if I come back someday? A small smile appeared on Malcolm's face. Then I hope you'll return. He paused. Not because this is where you work. His eyes reflected a warmth no one had ever seen before. But because this feels like home. Several months later, autumn painted Chicago in shades of gold. Ava Brooks walked across the campus of Chicago Memorial College carrying textbooks instead of cleaning supplies. She was exactly where she had always dreamed of being. Every Friday evening, a black SUV quietly waited outside the campus gates. Not to control her. Not to watch her. Only to drive her home if she wished. Sometimes she accepted. Sometimes she preferred to walk. Malcolm never questioned her choice. Because he had finally learned the lesson that changed not only his empire but his life. Love cannot be demanded. Respect cannot be purchased. And dignity is never something a powerful person gives to the weak. It is something every human being already possesses. And on the day Malcolm King finally understood that truth, the people around him stopped fearing their mafia boss. They simply respected the man he had chosen to become.